Welcome to the GSD with Jenny podcast, where we talk about how to overcome all the stuff that gets in the way of getting shit done. Imposter syndrome, fear, money, relationships, networking, building businesses. We're going to talk to experts, or as I say, mavens, that provide practical and tactical advice on how to GSD. I'm your host, Jenny Buchholz, founder and CEO of Haven Creative. Now, I started my business with $300 in a laptop and grew it to a team of Haven mavens serving clients around the world and generating over 7 figures in revenue. We were named one of the fastest growing companies in Charlotte and 2024 Crowns of Enterprise Woman-Owned Business of the Year, and I'm incredibly proud of the success we've had and to be among the 1% of woman-owned advertising agencies in the country. But I still need help too. So I started this podcast with the intent to dive deeper into the things that hold us back from achieving our goals. So thank you for joining me on this journey to GSD. Let's get started. Welcome to the GSD podcast. Today we have Sean Hoff. Sean is the founder and managing partner of Moniker, a corporate travel agency that helps companies connect with their teams through imaginative retreats and incentive trips and engaging offsites around the globe. His company has been around for over 10 years, and he's grown into one of the most prominent players in the industry in Canada, with 20 employees all through Canada and 1 in Colombia. When he's not planning awesome trips, you can usually find him on the road checking out new hotels and upcoming destinations with his wife and 1-year-old aspiring globetrotter, or back home in Toronto, trying out new recipes he's picked up on his travels in the kitchen, making a general mess of things, which, Sean, I can totally relate to because every time I cook, I make a mess. So welcome to the show. Tell me, Sean, how did you get started on your entrepreneurial journey?
So when I graduated from school, I went to school for business. I was convinced that I wanted to follow in my parents' footsteps and get into a career in like finance or banking or something like that. But what was happening every summer during my university years, while all my friends were applying for like internships and positions in like the Canadian equivalent of Wall Street, I was going abroad, and I was basically like doing these working holidays. One summer I worked at a hostel in London. Another summer I worked at as a barback in Temple Bar, Dublin. And then in my last summer, I went back to Ireland, but I ended up working as a hotel bartender in a small town on the West Coast called Galway. And I just loved traveling. I loved being on the road. I loved meeting and interacting with people from different countries and cultures. And so when I finally graduated, I got my first job, and it led me to my cubicle, and I sat down, and I had this like immediate sense of dread, and I was like, oh, I don't think this is going to be for me. And so after, I think I ended up doing that job for about a year or two, and then I left, and I started looking for jobs in the travel industry. And that was where I kind of discovered that this is okay. There's like actually careers and jobs that you can do in the travel industry. Then from there, fast forward a few more years, I was helping this company build out like the university division. They were just doing like student grad trips and like spring break type trips. And I helped them build out this new division, which would focus on university students. So I got my first taste of like building a business unit, at least growing a brand and figuring that out. And I really liked it. But I grew very tired of dealing with teenagers and spring breakers. And so eventually like parted ways amicably and just said, look, I don't think this is for me, but I've learned a lot and I really enjoyed what this has exposed me to. So I went off and wanted to do my MBA. And then, like most people who go through the MBA process, you get brainwashed into thinking that like, okay, you have to either work in like finance, consulting, or at a startup. And the same befell me. So after graduating, I got caught up in a whole bunch of like financial interviews and stuff. And kind of fortunately, kind of not fortunate, this was the summer of 2008, where I was a new grad looking for jobs in banking.
Yikes.
And one by one, all of my interviews started evaporating. And so I did my MBA in Barcelona. And so I found myself in Barcelona, no job prospects. The world was falling apart in terms of the economy. And so I just started doing bicycle tours. It was something to do. And I was living with a girlfriend at the time in a nice flat in Barcelona. And so it turned out to be one of the greatest jobs of my life. I was in the best shape of my life. I had a great tan. I was making really good money through tips. But I would lead bicycle tours, one at 10 a.m. and one at 4 p.m. And I did that for about 4 or 5 months. And my mother called me and was like, Sean, this is what you're going to do with your new MBA. And I was like, well, let's do the math here, because I'd usually about 20, 25 people in the morning and about 25 people in the evening. And
Wow.
they were each giving me like 10 euro tips. So I was making good money in
Yeah.
cash. And if I had gone back or started an internship or like as a first year job at a bank, I wouldn't have been making that kind of money.
Yeah.
So anyways, after a while, the season started to end. It was October. And I eventually got persuaded by my mom, and I just started to kind of get on the outs with the girlfriend. I moved back to Canada, and I ended up working in a bank for about 4 years, where I was like, you know what, this just isn't for me.
Yeah.
But another coincidental twist of fate is during that time, the group that I was a part of, they had something called President's Club. And so President's Club was like a top producer type trip. And they would take the top 60 brokers every year to some fabulous destination, all expenses paid. And they would plan these incredible itineraries, which back then I was like in my mid 20s. And I remember my first trip was to New Orleans. And I was just blown away. Like we all were flown business class, and when we
Oh,
arrived, they had
nice.
a big pink Hummer limousine pick us up
Pink Hummer.
at the airport. We stayed right on Bourbon Street at the Royal Sonesta, and like each day there was like cooking classes, or we would on like the River Gambler boats, or they took us to like a private jazz band playing, and it was just awesome. And
Wow.
so that kind of like the light bulb went off in my head that I didn't even know this like world of travel existed. And obviously I was pretty pumped about it. And
Yeah.
so year by year, I became less enchanted with what I was actually doing, and
Banking.
just
Yeah.
enough to make sure that I qualified for the trip. And towards the end of it, another twist of fate. But the last year that I was at the bank, the trip was to Barcelona. And as somebody who had lived there for many years and guided tours there, I know that city pretty much inside out. And it became very clear, like I was on the internal planning committee for the bank side, but it became pretty clear early on that the agency that they had hired, like nobody had ever actually set foot in Barcelona, and they were just recommending just terrible things.
Uh,
So I kind of hijacked the trip, and I started like putting together what the itinerary was and things that they wouldn't budge on. When we arrived on site, I remember one of the first things that they did was put everybody on a double decker bus with the earphones that say like 9 languages as you drive around the city.
yeah.
And I was like, that's a terrible way to experience a new city, especially when it's exciting and as Barcelona. And so I just like called up my old boss and I said, hey, could I borrow like 30 bicycles? And he's like, yeah, as long as you pay for them. I was like, no problem. And so I actually took about 30 people away from the bus tour, and they followed me around like a very, very long. We ended up stopping for lunch. We at the end of the day, like we were all on the beach drinking sangria at the sunset,
Nice.
and like we just blew off the rest of the agenda, but we had a great time. And at the end of the trip, and this happened every day for the whole trip. And at the end of it, when we were back home in Canada, the managing director of our group pulls me into his office, and he was like, he was angry, and he's like, you know how much money we wasted on all of the things that like we planned, and nobody
Oh,
showed up for them.
shit.
And I was like, well, it's not like you spent more money, because these people paid for all that stuff out of pocket, but of anyone, like we're in the markets, and like if you are supplying something that people don't demand, then like that's not really my fault, that's kind of the agency that you hired's fault. And anyways, he wasn't a fan of that, but that was when I started to realize that like, okay, maybe I actually am pretty good at this, and I think I can do this better than a company that's been hired to do this. And so I left. I made the decision that like I didn't think I wanted to wait another year for the next trip. And it was just kind of the right time in my life. I was in my late 20s. I didn't really, I didn't have major obligations like spouse, children, or anything, or mortgage. And so I left, and that was when we started back in 2014, I believe, 2013.
So you weren't really afraid to just take that jump from having a full-time career into being an entrepreneur?
No, and I've heard this quote about entrepreneurs as well, is like they have a certain crazy to them that
Yeah.
they just like don't
It's like,
necessarily
let's go.
calculate risks.
Okay.
Yeah, it was pretty easy. Like it was like, what's the worst that could happen?
Wow.
Um, I know I'm okay at this banking thing. I just don't like it. And
Yeah.
so if I go off and I try this and it doesn't work out, I'll just apply for a new job at a different bank or a different financial company. Luckily, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
But no regrets. And even when it was happening, like I think with most people who start a company, the first 2 years, like you're tested a lot. Like, is this actually working? Like, is this as successful or is this making the money that I expected it to? And you're tempted to just like fold your cards and go back to your old life.
Damn right.
But if you really truly believe in like what you are building or what you're doing, um, just work hard. And at the end of the day, like, yeah, I mean, it took me quite a few years before we started seeing some real success, but I never gave up. I never like just believed that this wasn't going to work out. I just always blindly had faith that it was just going to somehow happen.
So you didn't necessarily have a runway to say, I'm going to give myself 8 months or a year to become profitable before I go back to getting a real job. You just always had faith that it was going to work out.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I think when I left, I had my old boss from the student travel company. He invested in me and us as a company, and he became like a silent partner for that. But like, I had seed capital of 50,000, and that was it. So if
That's a hell
once
of a
that
lot
ran
more
out,
than most people get. So that's great.
most people it was. But I mean, when you're trying to live off that and you're trying to
Yeah.
hire one or two people off that, like it becomes like you're literally counting each month. If like
Yes.
one salary or two salaries go out this month, but you only brought in 5,000 or something, like it became pretty dicey until we started to see the fruits of our labor, like probably about a year or two in. But no, it worked out.
Yeah. But then 2 years in, so you're looking at 2016, 2017, you starting cranking. Are you growing fast at that point?
We were growing, yeah, we were growing about 25% every single year, which was really good. So when we started in 2013, we were just two people. And then
Wow.
by about 2019, 2020, we were up to, I believe, like nine people. And then this wonderful thing in 2020 happened
That's what
called
I was going
COVID.
to ask you. I think the question on everyone's mind, because here you have a travel company that started before COVID. How the heck did you get through COVID?
So it's a great story. So like I remember the day, I can picture it in my head. It was March 16th. I was in my kitchen in my apartment in Toronto, and I was cooking spaghetti bolognese, and I know this to a T. And because while I was doing that, my back was to the living room and the TV, and my phone was face down on the kitchen counter, and it was blowing up. And like I'm just not that popular, and it was like bzz, 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 and I'm like, what is going on? So I flipped it over, and I had like 25 notifications, and it was people. It was like some of my colleagues were like, "Oh my God, have you seen the news? Turn on the TV, turn on the news." I had other friends saying like, "Dude, what's going to happen? Are you okay? Like, what's the deal?" And I was like, well, "This is weird." And then, sure enough, I like flipped on the news, and this was the day that President Trump announced that they were closing the borders to European travel.
Yeah.
And 2 days later, on March 18th, we had a group of 130 Americans who were supposed to fly to Dublin.
Oh,
And so all of a sudden it was like,
yeah.
well, this isn't good. And I just remember like for the next like week, it was such a blur. Like we were glued to the news and the TV and trying to figure out like all the information. It was so patchy. Like one news station would say one thing and you'd hear something different. And we were like in contact with hotels and airlines. We're calling all of our clients to figure out like where their heads are at. Like we had some clients who had trips that were like 7, 8 months later to a different part of the world, but they're freaked out and they're like, no, we want to
Yeah.
cancel it. We want to pull our money back. Like, this is
Oh,
not good. And of course, for us in the travel business, we're like, this is like a major event.
yeah.
And
Of course.
so over those first 2, 3 weeks, I think I was working probably 15 hours, 16 hours a day. And we were just on the phone with airlines,
Oh,
with hotels, trying to like get cancellations and refunds. And then talking to clients and explaining where we were. Like hotels didn't want to give their money back. Airlines didn't know what the policy was yet.
Uh-huh.
and we were just kind of the middlemen. And sure enough, it was like 3 weeks in, we got a phone call from one of our like most loyal and legendary clients that we had worked with for like at that point like 7-8 years. And he calls to say like, I'm so sorry, Sean, but we made the decision that we're going to cancel the retreat. And that retreat was in October. So
Mm-hmm.
like 6 months away. And I'm like, really? Like, I mean, this is like a lot can change in the next month, 2 months, who knows? Of
Little
course,
did we
hindsight's
know. Yeah.
2020. But he was no, he was adamant it was just too much risk and they were going to cancel it. But then he said something that like turned out to really change the course of like our whole business. And he was like, look, I still want to get people together and we aren't going to be able to do that in person. So we're hosting an all hands on Zoom in a few weeks, and I really need your help to like give people a laugh. People are really freaked out right now. They're really spooked by what's going on. You guys are great at this stuff in person. You got to figure out how we're going to do that on Zoom. And I was like, yeah, you know what? Sure. Okay. I don't know. I was just not even thinking about that. And I hung up and I like in my mind, I'm like, I'm not going to do anything. And then it kind of like for the next few days, like I remember like my brother called me up. He's like, do you want to play some games on Zoom? It was like a Friday evening. We're all like getting drunk on Zoom with family and friends. I'm sure
Yeah.
everybody had those
Oh
happy
God,
hours.
yes. The
And I'm
Zoom
like,
happy hours.
these are terrible. There's got to be a better way to do this.
Yeah.
And that's when the light bulb went off. Like our team is very creative and we're good at coming up with like in-person team building and designing these like escape rooms and like bank heists using actors and things. And it was like, we can definitely come up with something better than what's being done right now. So our team at that point, we were, as I said, like I think 8 or 9 people. Um, we came up with this idea of like, what if we were to somehow figure out how to host a murder mystery on Zoom?
Really?
And the idea got legs. Like we started reaching out. We had a friend of a friend who played ultimate frisbee on a team, who was in the acting program at a local university, and we found 9 actors who were desperately looking for something to do
My
because
God.
they were in a theater production and that just closed down.
Right.
And our team started figuring out the logistics and how all the features that we could leverage off Zoom. And sure enough, like 2 weeks later, we had a script. We did dry runs, we did dress rehearsals,
What?
and we opened our first day. Our first show was to this company's all hands meeting. We had 140 people go through a murder mystery with 9 live actors, and it was a hit.
That's
It was such a
amazing.
hit.
That is, wait,
And
you need to kind of explain this again to me. So you had 9 actors and they're acting it out on screen and your participants are just watching it? Is that kind of
so
how it worked?
so 140 people show up on Zoom,
Okay.
and we mute them all. And then there's
Okay.
9 actors playing like the butler, the maid, the old wealthy gentleman.
Right.
And
Colonel Mustard?
we were using Colonel Mustard, and we were spotlighting each of those people so they would take up the screen in essentially like like a dialogue. So like Jenny would say something, like it was not me, it couldn't have been me,
Yeah.
and we would spotlight you.
Oh
And
my
then
God.
whoever was responding to you, we would spotlight them, and they would be like, "No, I saw you do it," and we did this thing. And then after that, we would break out, and each of these actors would be placed in one of 8 rooms,
Oh my
and your
God.
team would have
Yeah.
5 minutes to kind of discuss what you did, and then your team would split off, and one person would go to each of those rooms and interrogate these actors live. Like, well, what was your motive? Like, why did you do this? What was your relationship with so and so? They would take notes, and then after round one, they would go back to their team, and they would all compare notes and share what they learned, and they'd split up and they go to different rooms, and they just do that 3 times. And at the end, every team had to submit their guess of who done it, and we would do this huge reveal at the end where all the actors would come in, and it was a very, very like well done script, and there was always like this huge twist at the end, and
Freaking
it was really
brilliant.
fun. And what happened was one of the people who saw our first show was so impressed that he mentioned it to his wife, and his wife worked at Zoom, and she wanted to see it, and she loved it, and then she passed it on to somebody in their social media team, and they wanted to see a show. And so we did this. We invited them to the next show that we did, and it got on Zoom's own blog,
Holy
like their
crap.
main Zoom blog, which at that point was like probably the most important company in the world. And
Yeah.
then it just exploded.
Dude, I did not know that
We were
story.
doing, yeah, we were doing like, I remember in some weeks we were doing 15 to 20 murder mysteries. We expanded our acting staff to like 20, 25 actors so we
Oh
could do
my
3 shows in
God.
a day. It was crazy. We were
That's
like
amazing.
production producers. It was great.
Yeah.
And then it just expanded from there. We started getting into like we wanted to build an escape room, but how do you do that virtually? So I'm sure you've like on
Oh my
Zillow
God.
or these
Yeah.
like websites for real estate where you can like navigate 3D through a home to see what the home looks like.
Yeah.
We we repurposed that into an escape room. So we built a fake home like on using 3D software, and then we would plant clues and things, and you could zoom in and you could walk around the house. It was so fun.
That is
And
so
yeah, so not
smart.
only did we, and we did this for a while. So not only did we not have layoffs or not, like we actually grew as a company. We went into COVID with 8 or 9 people, and I think we ended with
Wow.
12. Um, and we were very profitable, surprisingly,
That
because
is
running a trip,
amazing.
yeah, running a trip is low margins. Like you got to pay the airline, you got to pay the hotel, you got to pay everyone. But
Sure.
then when you're running these virtual mysteries, it's like it's very low overhead, and so we did quite well.
That,
And that
wow.
yeah, we kept going with the virtual. Like 2020, 2021 was very, very big for us. And then
Okay.
2022 kind of dipped down, 2023. And then this year we finally kind of like put it to sleep. People like the demand or the interest is just not there anymore. And we just don't have enough work to keep all of, like the live actors and all the people that we had involved consistent. So we finally pulled the plug. But it was a great run. It got us through
Man.
COVID, and I think a big thing about that was is as well as like a lot of our competition either like went into hibernation mode during the pandemic, whereas we were still going full steam ahead and growing the team so that when travel started to come back, like we were ready to go, and we
Oh,
had
yeah.
made like hundreds of new relationships with companies that were calling us up and like asking us about virtual stuff. We were like, hey, did you guys realize like our core business is actually getting people together in person? And so business took off the second travel started back, and we grew from 12 to 15, 15 to 18, and in like very quickly. And we've also benefited because one of the biggest kind of silver linings of the pandemic is it made remote working and hybrid working mainstream. And so all of these companies that previously had like
Mm.
an office in New York or an office in San Francisco gave them up, and they started hiring employees in Europe, and they had some employees in Latin America, and they had people spread out all over. And all of a sudden they were like, well, we need to get together at least once a year in person with everyone. And so they called us up and they said, can you help us do that? And so, yeah, it's been a pretty wild ride.
That's amazing. I mean, talk about this is a GSD podcast, right? It's about getting shit done. Talk about a GSD moment to go through COVID and go, okay, I have to completely pivot, which I know that word became so popular because everyone was pivoting. But that is the truly innovative way to pivot and not get like bury your head in the sand and freak out that, like you said, everyone else is kind of pulling back. You innovated. How did you stay the
I
course?
I remember when it launched, like sorry, when the pandemic was happening, and all obviously our employees were freaked out.
Oh, yeah.
You know, were they going to have a job in a few weeks? I remember putting together this like emergency plan deck, and my whole deck was like, here's our 20-week strategy. That's how long I like was thinking that COVID was going to last 20 weeks. And the reason was because way back, there was SARS, and SARS
Oh,
impacted
yeah.
Toronto quite heavily. And SARS was like kind of in and out in like 10, 15 weeks. And then everything was back to normal. And I was like, I guess this is going to be like that. Um, Obviously, that didn't happen. And
Mm-hmm.
so the 20-week turned into like 30-week, turned into 1 year plan. And yeah, it was just like we constantly evolved. Like we were trying to figure out what we were going to do to stay relevant and to stay like kind of bleeding edge in terms of like interesting stuff, but also keeping on top of like the market. People got really sick of Zoom. People
Mm-hmm.
didn't want to hop on for an hour with their colleagues and do stuff. So we got into like like live stuff where around the holidays, I remember we had our staff were like packing these like cocktail kits, and shipping them out to clients so that they could like hop on and they could
I
do
do
like a
remember
murder
those.
mystery, but at the same time they were
Yeah.
having like cocktail kits delivered to their homes and other things. It was a pretty interesting time.
So it was just you in a room creating this 20-week plan, or you pulled your team together in order to really get all that together, get shit done?
I remember the first one, the first 20-week plan. I think I was just honestly flying by the seat of my pants. I was like, here's
Yeah.
what I think we should do. We got to cut expenses, preserve like our savings, increase revenues where we can, try to claw back as much money as we can, like see what we can do to negotiate like credits with like clients and things. And then after that, when it was like, okay, we started to see that the virtual actually could have some potential to like just at least help us survive.
Mm-hmm.
That's when we sat down with the team and we were like, all right, ideas. Like, what do we got?
Yeah.
Escape room, more murder mysteries, different scripts. What about if we did like a trial? What about if we did like trivia? And it was like, great idea, run with it. And like
Oh,
people on our
cool.
team who had job titles, yeah, people who were hired as like trip planners or like we had somebody who her role was essentially like she oversaw all of our proposals and our research and like her job was to basically fly around, like meet with hotels, like see which hotels were good and worthy of like being shared with our clients. She was helping us write scripts for like a fake trial where people would log on and like go through
Yeah.
things, or she was helping us solve like create riddles and puzzles for our escape rooms. So everybody in our company was involved and like they were just doing whatever we could necessary and like playing to their strengths. We had a lot of operational people on our team. They were the ones figuring out the logistics of it, like run sheets of like, okay, then you go here and then you do this and you open this breakout room and then you have to give this person this
I
permission.
love that.
Whereas
Yeah.
like the left brain people were like, okay, well, what happens if we made it look like this, or what happens if we thought like this room could be that, and we could play around with like green screens and backgrounds and switch it around. Yeah, it was pretty wild.
What I love about that is, as a leader, that you were open to discovering what people their strengths were, like you said, the right brain people, the left brain people, and how to refocus them into a different, completely different job than what they were doing in order to make this innovative idea happen. Again, the epitome of GSD. You moved parts around to make it happen. Um, Now in business that you're doing well, how do you get your team and your whole company around getting stuff done? What tools do you use? How do you get things done? How do you motivate people?
So one of the one of the most effective ways I think to get our team all on the same page in GSD is we're big believers in transparency. So as like the business leader, I'm 100% open book with how the company is doing, our financials, how we're doing performance wise, our plans, our like hiring goals, even like people's career paths. And I think and you know, it's kind of controversial. Like we met through an organization called EO, and in my group, there's 7 other people who they have mixed feelings. Like some of them think this is crazy to show your employees like the financials and what your plans are for the company, and other ones think it's admirable. But what I have found is that when you lay it out on the table and everybody kind of sees that this is the plan, this is the vision, and there's no smoke and mirrors about it, everybody starts rowing in the same direction. They know what needs to get done. They know what direction they need to face, and I have found like unquestionably it has helped our business. The other thing about it is like when you sit down, you're like, okay, so like here's where we need to go. Where do you fit in? And people, it might not be in their exact current role, or might be on their radar that, oh, I could see how I could fit into that next phase, that next idea, which is doesn't necessarily fit me today. Is they start to, you know what, actually that would interest me. Hey, Sean,
Yep.
I saw that like you're thinking of introducing this, and this initiative. Like, I'd really like to be involved in that. That's really like that fascinates me. I didn't know that about you. Like
Yep.
we recently, like we never really cared. Well, we cared about social media, but we never really took it very seriously. And part of what we do is like we travel around the world. We have this great content that we're shooting on site, hotels, travel destinations, and things. Our clients like doing amazing things in very interesting locations, but we weren't leveraging it the way it probably should. And like part of that is me. Like I'm 40 years old. I don't even have my own Instagram, and I'm not the person to care that much about it. But I mentioned that this is something that I think we're underappreciating and underutilizing, and like it should be part of our strategy and our marketing going forward. And like after I finished that, like one of the hands on our team shot up immediately, and this woman on my team was like, I am super keen to do this. Like I love doing this in my. She had her own side travel blog, and she had her own side Instagram account, and she has really helped us grow our social media as like a brand and a profile for the company. But then as well, it had the double effect of like hiring for us is so easy now because she's made our company's like profile and like what we do so public, as like you peeling back the curtains. This is what it's like to work with us. This is what it's like on the inside. And people are attracted to that because
Yep.
they kind of get a pretty good sense of what it would actually be like to work at our company compared to others where you don't really know what it's like beyond the job description.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm a big proponent of using social media to show the company culture and how it is to work there. Some people think it's lead gen, and I think it is more for the company culture aspect. I'm a big proponent
Yeah.
as well of the transparency. But some leaders, I think they get confused between transparency, vulnerability, and just flat out like they think there's too much emotion in front of their employees. Maybe like they don't, And I tell me about how you see that, like being how transparent and vulnerable is a safe amount.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and kind of tying back to the other, like what tools do you use? So one of the biggest things we do as well is we do pulse checks. So every quarter, and this comes back to being transparent and vulnerable, is every quarter we send out a survey to everybody on the team, and you can choose to be anonymous or you can choose to put your name. And the questions are things like, how do you feel about the current state of the company? How do you feel about like the future of the company? How would you rate our culture and like vibe and morale out of 10 for the last 3 months? Like, how are you doing mentally? How are you doing financially? Like these kind of questions where we're trying to really get at like literally take the pulse of everybody in the company.
Yep.
And some of the questions are things like, what could we be doing better? What is something that we've tried to introduce that was a flop and we should consider stopping? And you get some pretty good feedback. Like there are people on our team who are not shy to share like their true thoughts about some of the things that we've messed up on, and we get a lot of feedback about stuff that is going really well. But putting that out there and collecting that feedback, and also just like even just having a forum for our people to like give transparent feedback. We are vulnerable because like I get excited about something. I'm like, let's do this, let's introduce this, and then I find out a month later that people think it's a terrible idea. Well,
Yeah.
sometimes I don't have the best ideas, and that's fine, because you've got to kind of test things out. But that is instrumental for us. I think we've changed the direction of, or at least tacked a bit on a lot of things that we've done, and it's also input that has shaped like the direction that we've grown. Another tool that we use often is like we do get together as a team on our own internal retreats twice a year. So we just got back from Prince Edward Island, which is on the east coast of Canada. It's kind of like Maine. And it's a tool in the sense that because we're a fully remote team and the whole company is spread across the country, we don't see each other face to face that often.
Right.
We see each other on Zoom or Slack every day, but there is something that you just cannot recreate
Yep.
from the in-person interactions. And so this is I do something called the State of the Union, where it's like at the beginning of the year, here's how we are doing as a company, here's how we did last year, here's where we are today, and here's the ideas, the goals, the vision for the year ahead. And at the halfway point in the summer, we do like a State of the Union update. Here's how we've done so far, here's where we are today, and here's what's the plan for the rest of the year. So it's kind of like a more shorter, smaller version of that. And I think like again, like we'll go through the numbers, we'll go through the performance, we'll share all of the pulse check questions or other feedback. I open it up to a town hall question. It's 100% anonymous, where just before we go into the State of the Union, we send out an anonymous town hall survey. And I ask people, can you ask questions about the company? And can you ask questions about me? And some of the questions about the company will be like, what's our plan if this happens? Or what are your thoughts on this? And like they can be pretty challenging to answer, but I will, and I'll put every single question up there
You do.
because I know that if somebody asks a question that they know is a hardball, and I
Don't
ignore it
answer.
or I
Yep.
glance over it or I don't include it, they know I'm not being honest. They know I'm
Yep.
cherry picking. And then the personal questions they can raise questions like somebody might ask, like, what are your plans 5 years from now? And that might not involve this company.
Yeah.
It might involve something different. It might involve, or they might ask a question like, what's the most challenging thing that you face like on a day-to-day basis? And it might be something to do with, the people, the clients that we work with, and it's honest.
Yeah.
So the vulnerability is there. And I think as well, it also, by doing that, and by having these town hall where every question is included and answering them truthfully, it builds trust. And like, I think that would be my last tool, that like transparency and trust is a huge one as well. Is like, I don't think anybody in this company doesn't trust each other, doesn't trust me, as like my leadership in terms of like what I'm trying to achieve, and being open to them that like I'm doing my best. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that trust comes from taking action on the feedback, because it sounds like you're gathering the data, but you're not. A lot of companies do this. They gather the data and then they don't actually do anything about that data. It sounds like you're taking action. So that helps go, okay, I will give my feedback because I know Sean's going to do something about it. And now you've built that great
Yeah.
culture of trust. So that and communication, right? A lot of people just don't even communicate. Like you were saying earlier, they're maybe too afraid to share their ideas. But we often find if we just talk about stuff, we create trust.
Yes, exactly. We like, in terms of communication, like I think just always, we probably over communicate. One of my favorite phrases in the company is, nobody's ever complained about over communication. Like,
Yeah.
we use this as a guideline with clients. If you say, we're going to have this to you by Wednesday, and it's very clear that it's probably not going to happen by Wednesday, nobody's going to complain. If you say, hey, listen, just a
Yep.
heads up, like, unfortunately, we were waiting on something, it didn't happen, reset the expectation. It's more realistic that we're going to have it by Thursday or Friday now, just to let you know. And if Thursday's rolling around, hey, just an update, like, just over communicate.
Yes.
Nobody would ever complain that they felt too informed about what's going
Right.
on. And
I
and
totally
the
agree with you.
opposite is, yeah, and I
Mhm.
mean, I wish a lot of our suppliers and vendors would follow the same, but
Yes,
we're big on that as well.
I also agree with you on that. I mean, Haven is a communications agency, right? So we always say that every problem in business starts with communication, something not said or misunderstood. So we're big believers in over communicating as well. And I just wish people would just do what you say you're going to do. Just actually GSD, just get
And
it
it's okay
done.
if you can't, but then
Right.
just explain.
Communicate
Yeah,
that.
it's like,
Right.
yeah.
Right. So, out of all the trips that you've planned, I'm fascinated to know, like, what would be your favorite ones that I should go on, or anyone should go on? Like, what was the coolest experience? Because I'm jealous and I want to go somewhere, and I'm sure you've planned some really kick-ass trips.
Yeah, I mean, we've done some really glamorous ones. So there's two types of trips that we do. Like,
Okay.
one would be called an incentive trip. An
Okay.
incentive trip is like what I went on when I was way back working at the bank. It's like, if you hit your goals, or it's for salespeople. Like, if you hit your goals, then here's the reward. And the reward, there's no work on the trips. It's all about just like
Fun.
spoiling and having fun and doing like 5-star hotels and everything. And so for those ones, like, we earlier this year, I think it was in March, we had a group, that was, they literally rented an entire island in the Maldives. They took over the entire island and hotel, 140, 150 rooms for 5 nights. And you can imagine, like, that trip is just bonkers. And some of
Yeah.
the videos and the pictures that my team was sending me from Maldives, I'm like, wild. Oh, but my personal favorite has not been necessarily the most glamorous. It was one of my first trips. This is way back 2015. We were 2 or 3 years in. We took a group to Tuscany, and part of why it was so special to me was it was the first time that, like, Tuscany is a very like special place to me, but it was also the first time that we had a client that had was referred to us, and it was like, okay, like, this is actually working. Like, people are trusting us to handle pretty large budgets and coordinate like 100 plus people to go to Italy. And what we had done on that trip was just incredible. Like, we put together this Italian job where, we told them that it was just a team building, and everybody was, thinking drum circles or trust falls. But then we led them around a corner, and we had lined up 16 Mini Coopers, and they had walkie talkies and little envelopes with like some clues in the dashboard. And of course, they're jazzed up and they're excited about what's about to happen. And then we have this off-duty carabinieri, which is like their version of like state trooper type people, come careening down the driveway, sirens blazing, and he explains that there's a robbery in the nearest city, and they need help because their police force is small, and they heard that there was this large group in town, and maybe you could help. So they all get into their Mini Coopers and they peel off and they go to the first town, and we have an actor sitting in front of a bank, and he's got his hands tied and he's got tape on his mouth, and you take the tape off and he's like, yes, thank you, yes. The robbers, they just left, and as they were leaving, this piece of paper fell out of one of their pockets. Perhaps it's a clue.
Oh,
You pick up the paper and it's like a receipt for a haircut in the next town over of Cortona. Oh, okay, well, I better get in my car and drive to Cortona. And you get to the barber shop and you ask him questions. How many were they? What did they do? What do they look like? And then, I heard that they were going to have lunch in this next town. Get in your car, you drive to the next town, and then you go to the restaurant and you talk to a waiter. The waiter explains that, this and this. And it was so fun to plan. And then to see it actually come to life was just, for me, like, I was like, wow, we're pretty good at this.
That's amazing.
So it was fun.
So you get to go on these trips too? You some of your people, obviously, they plan it, they go on it, or how's that work?
Yeah.
Wow.
So we always staff the trips because like the people who like are planning it for, it could be 6 months of planning.
Yeah.
They will be the ones that go on site, and they actually make sure that the execution is running flawless. A big part of that is there's nobody who knows a trip better. And then the other side of it is that we don't want our client contact to be, that we want them to participate and just enjoy the retreat as like everybody else, and not be sitting there and worried about whether, dinner is on its way. It's like 5 minutes late, or is the bus on its way? Like, our team is worrying about that stuff so that they can actually enjoy things. So when we started out, I used to go on a lot of the trips. I love to travel. And then I think as I've gotten, older and just like as the company has grown, I don't go on as many trips. I think I go on maybe one a year now. But our younger members of the team, they love it. It's a huge perk of the job. We've got a group that's going to Thailand in February. We've got another group that's going to Dublin in a week. Like, they're all over.
Man, I was going to say, I was wondering if they would get jealous that their own Moniker retreats aren't like their client retreats, but if they're already going on them, they're good, right?
Oh, we do some pretty fun stuff too. We were in Tuscany last summer for our 10-year anniversary.
Wow.
And we went hot air ballooning. We were
Amazing.
we had a lot of fun. We did dragon boat racing. And then we just got back from PEI, which is a quieter one, but we had like a murder mystery dinner for our team. We went oyster shucking and learned how to do lobster trap fishing on the sea. And then we had the fiddling fisherman. He played his fiddle while we had a lobster lunch right on the boat.
That's
in the middle of the ocean. It was super fun.
Okay, I have a question selfishly, because I run a company, but maybe someone else out there does too, and they want to know this. What should you allocate for a budget for a good retreat?
We have a perfect rubric. Is if you're doing something domestic, it's about $750 per person per day.
Okay.
And if you're looking to do something international, it's about $1,000 per person per day.
Okay.
And that works out really close. And that's everything. That's like accommodation, transportation, flights, taxes and gratuities, drinks, a DJ, AV, meeting space, like everything that you could think of. And then our fee. And if you want to plan it yourself, you could probably knock off a few $100 too. So, in general, like I think our average program, we did the math, is about 4 nights, and it's about 4,000 per person. Okay. But we've also done smaller of these like incentive trips where it's like 20 people going to. We just had a group that went to Copenhagen, and they dined at like 3-star Michelin restaurants for 4 nights straight. Oh, and during the day, they did like design and architecture and like did some pretty cool stuff as well. But that was a very small group of, I think, only 18 or 20 people.
It sounds like, though, you started out with this GSD mission to create a company without ever worrying about failing. And then you built an entire team around you that also GSDs on the daily to make these amazing, innovative trips happen. It's pretty incredible, Sean.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you.
So one last question. Everyone has a hype song, something that helps them get motivated in order to get shit done. What would that hype song be for you, so we can add it to our playlist?
Oh, Macklemore, Can't Hold Us.
All right.
Anytime I'm stepping into the gym, that is the first song on the playlist. It's just got such a hype intro beat that definitely gets people pumped up.
Very good. But we'll add that one to the list. Thank you so much for joining me today, Sean. It's been great to talk with you.
Thank you, Jenny. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to GSD with Jenny. If you found this episode helpful, share it with a friend. For more ways to GSD, you can also find me on LinkedIn at Jenny Buchholz, where you can sign up for my Maven Mindset newsletter, or follow me on Instagram at Maven Jenny. Until next time, go GSD, Mavens!